New Landing's Job Chat is brought to you in part by the Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future, and by the EBS Group with an unparalleled background in Oracle solutions and services.
Even the best storytellers have to develop their stories. How do you go about developing your personal story? You'll find out today on Job Chat. Your hosts today are Hector Silva and Sarah Kane. Our guest is Andrew Nemiccolo. Sarah, a little about Andrew.
Andrew is founder of 7-Story Learning, which helps individuals and organizations communicate through story in order to learn, lead, and sell more effectively. Through group workshops, organization-wide initiatives, and individual coaching, Andrew teaches the simple chapter method of finding, refining, and delivering great stories. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Welcome, Andrew. Well, welcome again. In a previous Job Chat, you told us about why stories work. Well, if we're trying to build our own personal stories, is there a process that we can follow or something that'll help us to build it better?
I think there is. Everybody has great stories, but they don't always know that immediately. And what I've found is that a lot of times I'll be working with individuals, I'll be working with a sales team, anyone who has to have an important conversation, and they're bought in. Hey, stories are great. Let's try stories. I think we'll try this. But where do we start? And I think it has to do with really having an ability to look at your past experiences and make sense of them, because stories are sense-making. It's the ability to look back and find meaning in things that you've done. And that's kind of hard to do, either if you're in the moment or you don't have a toolkit for that. I think there's also a natural humility. When we talk about stories and at their ideal about characters solving conflicts and heroes and what does it all mean, and we think about sort of the grand stories, the Hollywood epics, great orators that speak, I think we hold it to a really high standard. And so now someone goes, oh, I don't know if I can do that. That's a lot. And so what we do is a process called story mining. And story mining is sort of something I sort of stumbled upon accidentally, I guess, as I was trying to figure out next steps for myself. And it really has to do with looking for nuggets, looking for, as the mining a metaphor implies, looking for unpolished bits of gold or diamonds that really are quite valuable, and everybody has them. And no one I've worked with, individual or organization, who goes through this process at the end says, wow, we didn't find anything. Everyone's amazed at all the great stuff they found. It's just a matter of asking questions, really listening, and this is sort of the process I wish that I had help with a couple of years ago myself. And it's just a series of questions. And so I call them the 7 Fs, the letter F, and sort of makes it easy to remember, I guess. But the first one is flow. Think about times when you were in a state of flow. Flow is sort of this, psychological state where, wow, where did the time go? That was so easy. Oh my God, it's 4 hours gone by? It felt like nothing. You're challenged, invigorated. Everything just seems to be in the zone, be the ball, whatever you want to call it. And those are moments you really want to focus on, because those are things you're good at. Those are things that you're probably going to be able to do well, enjoy, and get paid for. As an organization, as a job seeker, as an entrepreneur, it makes sense to figure out what those patterns of flow are. And so I'll work with folks to talk about, who are clients you enjoyed working with, who are projects you worked on, that you enjoyed. What was your happiest moment? Again, I noticed I've never said, tell me a story, because we're not there yet. And that actually shuts down the brainstorming process. And so we walk through some of those things. And some of it's about what people are not. If you're someone who thrives in a particular environment, it's okay. Let's acknowledge you need to be in that environment. And let's try to replicate that. Let's have that moment. Instead of having those flow moments, once a year, why not have them once a week? Why not have them once a day? That's really the goal. And so by looking through those flow moments, we can look for patterns to find out what people are good at. And it's a great place to start. And that becomes the conflicts that you solve, those places where you were, become one of the basis for developing some stories out of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Andrew, when you're thinking about flow moments, it's kind of a brainstorming process, I would imagine. Do you give yourself a certain amount of time to kind of think about it? Do you need to bounce ideas off of people you know? How do you just start that?
Yeah, I mean, so, I have a series of questions that I ask folks to kind of go through that. And you're right, Sarah, a lot of it is sort of individual. But that actually brings us to the second, one of the other F's, which is friends. And so although folks may really pick up on a lot of those flow moments, you'll probably have your first couple real quickly, and then maybe dig a little farther as you go back. We also want to go to friends. And the other thing what we do, by the way, to sort of structure it, is I ask folks to not just think randomly. We actually write down houses you've lived in, cars you've driven, jobs you've had, clients you've worked with, projects you've worked on, businesses you've started. You get the idea. And then we go through on a timeline for the last, whatever an appropriate time frame is, the last 5 years or what have you. It could be even back to childhood. And for each of those, we sort of ask all of those, the 7F questions. It really is, the idea is to leave no stone unturned. And what people will find is, I did this with a client the other day. At 12 years old, he had already expressed this interest in his chosen field. I mean, he was reading publications in this field at a really quite a young age. And so that really established, wow, there's a pattern here. This is a guy who loves to do that. So absolutely, it's a little bit structured, but it's also not non-linear. But friends, the second F. I ask everyone who's doing this to reach out to 5 friends and send them a little note. And don't ask for stories, because that's too high of a hurdle. Just ask, what do you remember about me when we worked together? What are things that stand out to you? So memory, remember, what do you recall? That seems to, I've found through trial and error, that word seems to really trigger something, those memorable moments. And 2 things happen. This really fills in gaps from the other 7F questions, because often our strength, our natural ability is something that we're not aware of. And so if there are flow moments that maybe you didn't pick up on, everyone who does this is really surprised. They say, oh my gosh, first of all, I had people saying great things about me, which we all could use once in a while. It sparked a conversation. We went to coffee, or we talked on the phone again. But people are always shocked at the things that people say about them. Like, really, that's what you remember about me? In a good way. And so it really is a great pick-me-up, and it also helps to flesh things out, to have those conversations. And frankly, from a networking perspective, it reminds people, hey, I'm in the game, I'm looking. It's a great reason to reach out to folks.
We're talking about positive flow.
Yes.
But there are some negative stories that can come out of this also, where you've learned from that negativity.
Exactly.
So are you asking those friends also to recall anything, regardless of whether it's positive or negative?
That's a good question. I haven't done that, because I think it can put it can sort of put the dampen things. But I do think that the third F is important. It's the failure question. I think anybody who's, if you're in this process of story mining, you're strategically thinking, where do I want to go as a professional? You kind of owe it to yourself to think about times you screwed up. And, the important thing then is, what did you learn from it? There's a bunch of reasons to do this. I mean, if you know yourself, I think you're going to be more effective walking in to interviews, other important conversations. And we all know you're going to get that question, right? What's the question?
What's your greatest weakness?
Right. What's your greatest weakness? And how much more authentic and real and refreshing would it be to get the answer of, well, I had a problem with time management, but I worked on it, and here's how I'm solving it. I still have a time management problem, but I have it completely under control because I've taken this class and I have this method. Wouldn't that actually be a natural, refreshing answer versus, what other things do you hear? When people,
I really can't think of any weaknesses.
Right, I don't have any weaknesses, right?
Work too hard.
Or I work too hard, right? And I'm always at the office till 10 o'clock at night. Well, then maybe you're not good at time management, that raises other questions. So I think an authentic way to, not in a completely catastrophic way, but being able to reflect on your weaknesses it's a great trait. And it maybe lets the employer know that this is someone who'll be honest with me in the future, because they're being honest with me right now. And the big question is, what did you learn from it?
New Landing's Job Chat will be back right after a word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name is William Easley, Managing Director of Wealth Management with Prosperity Advisory Group. A job loss is an unsettling experience that almost always challenges finances and lifestyle. Important decisions need to be made immediately that work toward protecting financial security, which include making significant adjustments to day-to-day spending habits. The obvious catch is how to make ends meet on less income. If you should find yourself and your family in this situation, you should begin by itemizing all of your current expenses, no matter how small, and assigning them as either fixed or discretionary. Examples of fixed expenses are mortgage payments or health insurance premiums. Discretionary expenses would include entertainment costs or that weekly dinner out at your favorite restaurant. The key is to eliminate as many of your discretionary expenses as possible and reduce your fixed expenses if able. More importantly, don't postpone these decisions even if you receive a generous severance package. You must tackle them right away. Your ability to maintain a wide array of financial options may depend on a proactive rather than a reactive approach to budgeting so that you can protect your other financial goals like retirement and the assets earmarked for them. Again, I'm Willie Measley with Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future.
Are you documenting all this as you go along?
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of pen and paper. Whatever works for folks. Some people like to word process it when they're doing things. Some people like to write. I'll certainly use worksheets and stuff when I work with folks. I find myself also asking a lot of follow-up questions. Well, wait a minute. Tell me what happened here. Why did you do that? To dig even deeper, because there's often a lot of underlying stories behind that.
So it's not good enough just to think about it. You need to actually write it down.
Yeah, it's a little bit of work. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, most job seekers aren't going to do this. They're really not, because it's a lot of work. I found that going into a series of interviews, that going through story mining and something we can talk about later, which is story banking, of actually then organizing the finished stories, it's about a day or two of work. I mean, it's not, I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. But I can't just give you a dossier and say, now you're Francine from North Dakota, study this. You got to really do the work to figure out who you are and why you've done it. But this is the process I've used for every job I've gotten. And when I've gotten lazy, things haven't gone well.
And when you're trying to tell them about your accomplishments, when you start putting it in story form, it starts to bring back some things you may have forgotten, which are going to maybe make the difference between getting that job or not.
Yeah. You're gonna stand out. I mean, think about job interviews. I mean, I know when I've done job interviews, 8 interviews in a day. Sometimes, you maybe have another day and a half of interviews. As the interviewer, they're exhausted, right? It's tiring for them. And so thinking about it from the other person's perspective, let's make it easy for them to make that decision. Let's give them the information they need, because stories can provide information, but also the emotional connection so they can be excited and remember you. You want to be the person when the interview team is talking about at the end of the day saying, remember the guy who started that orphanage in Boston? Remember that lady who used the balloon to solve that problem at the last minute? You want to give them tangible, specific examples so they can be talking about you, Remember the guy who at 22 already started his own company? Oh yeah, I love talking to him. That gives them a brand, a name, a way to talk about you. You're making their job easier.
Yeah, especially if you're an entrepreneur, because you want them to remember you, because they're going to meet a lot of people during the day.
Exactly.
So you are the person that you want top of mind at that point.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, so we talked about flow, friends, and failure. What's next on the list?
The next really important one is forks in the road. If you think about a fork in the road, it's such a critical moment. Why did you decide to get into this? Why did you decide to get out of this? What was your mindset? If you think about interview questions that people have, it's often not so much focused on what you were doing at ABC Company. Tell me why you left ABC Company. Tell me why you went to XYZ Company. Those are the types of questions that often get asked, because there's always a story there. There's always background information. There's context. It shows insight into how someone thinks. And it really gives us a great perspective on maybe the types of decisions they're going to make in the future while they're at your company. And the forks in the road don't have to be between jobs. It could be forks in the road while you're at a company. Maybe an important decision you had to make. I had to make a strategic decision, but where our marketing team was going to go. there's always a great story there. And then again, to kind of transition from, as an aside, from storytelling to story listening, I found this is one of the great questions just to ask in any networking conversation, interviews aside. Hey, why did you decide? Tell me why you decided to do this. Asking someone else a fork in the road question is a great way to get a conversation going, because everybody loves to talk about it.
And listening to that story fills in a lot for the person. On the other hand, if you don't give this story, then it might seem as if you're trying to hide something.
Exactly. Either there, or in addition to that, I would add, Hector, besides just sort of duplicitously hiding it, I think also there's the concept of just not being aware. Is someone going through life willy-nilly? Are they just sort of making decisions and reacting, or are they a purposeful decision maker, a problem solver who's looking ahead, looking down the road? Some people come to a fork in the road and they pause, and they know there's a fork in the road, and they think about it. Other people just go down one, and a couple miles later they're like, oh, I guess there was a fork back there, but here I am. And how do you want to convey to folks how you've lived your life?
And it seems like we love hearing stories about the forks in the road, probably because they often tell us a little bit more about a person's thought process, but also because we love to hear stories of people overcoming challenges.
Exactly. All stories are about overcoming conflict. And the other reason that forks in the road are so important is that we kind of like to know those background stories. So whether it's LinkedIn or your About page, people love to know about you. If you'll notice, I talk with corporate clients about this. The About page is one of the most highly viewed pages on most websites. You ever notice when you're surfing, they have their widgets front and center, but really you're trying to go, well, who owns this company? Is it just a P.O. box in another country, or is it an actual business with faces and bios and a mailing address? And how do they get started? And why are they doing this business? I find it's one of the most common pages that I visit, and there's a lot of data that's starting to suggest that's one of the first places that people go. They want to build trust in you first. And so forks in the road, hey, let me tell you why we got started. You probably know some. You know the Ben and Jerry's story. You know other founders' stories. Great firms do a good job of this, and every individual should do it too.
And by telling that story up front with anybody you're talking to, it puts into context anything you might say later. So it's important that first story is one that really sticks with them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what follows the fork in the road?
So another F, and those first four are probably the most important, I would say, but there's some other ones I think to flesh things out. The next I would say is found stories. So sometimes, there's something you want to talk about, but you don't have a really good story yourself, or it would be inappropriate to talk about it for yourself. And a good example of that might be humility or compassion. So it would be a bit weird for me to go on and on about I'm such a humble person. I mean, you cannot believe the awards I've gotten for my humility, right? That would be a bit much, but it would be really authentic if this is a value that still is important to me. If I did try to practice it, it would be to, I could talk about my mom. My mom is a very humble person. And so saying, my mom is someone who it just inspires me with her humility, with her compassion, things she's done for others. So I think highlighting either personal or famous individuals, books, philosophies, religion, things like that of people who inspire us, I think that's also can add into the larger story bank I think that people will be building. So found stories are really important. The other thing is funny stories. May not be a part of your primary strategy going into a job interview, but we all like humor. Self-deprecating humor is the best. I mean, as long as it's not catastrophic. I think things where you can poke fun at yourself are great stories to kind of have a few. And someone who can't poke fun at themselves, is that really someone we want to work with? Probably not.
And do you need to test those funny stories to make sure what you think is funny is actually funny to the rest of the world? Yeah,
that's probably a good thing. I'm not, obviously we want to stay away from sort of charged humor, but I think things that are just sort of, again, poking fun at yourself in a professional context, I think that can work.
That's where the friends come in again.
Exactly. Your friends may have a few of those. Absolutely.
And what would be the last one?
Yeah, so the final F is future. So the things we've talked to thus far, the 6 things, Hector, are retrospective. It's sort of things you've done in the past, stories that have sort of completed themselves. You're able to look back on them with perspective and analyze them and think about them and kind of have some clarity. The final, I think, is future stories. Having looked at all of those things, what are stories that aren't finished yet? Where do you want to go? It's the where do you want to be in 5 years sort of thing, I guess, if we want to interview. Running a business. What do you want to do? Do you want to expand? Do you want to write a book? Do you want to hire more employees? Do you want to increase sales X? Have a new product? Whatever that is, I think that could be really exciting because people latch onto those. With the biggest sort of examples of future stories, that we might be familiar with is things like John F. Kennedy Jr. saying, by the end of the decade we'll send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth, or Dr. Martin Luther King standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial talking about a time in which there is racial equality. And for most of us that might be a bit grandiose probably in some networking settings, but I think we all have things we're excited about. You have friends that are involved in nonprofits, charity work, things like that. And people love to get behind someone who has that drive, who has that energy. So I think, thinking about those unfinished stories can be really engaging and it can be really attractive. We all gravitate to someone who has that energy.
Now, as you're going through these 7 Fs, you're going to come up with a lot of stories. Do you limit yourself and say, well, no, that's not relevant to what I'm doing right now, or do you keep an open mind?
I think you definitely keep an open mind. And, initially we're not necessarily looking for stories. We're just looking for sort of story ideas. And then we'd go back through that list and start to look for patterns. And so there are a number of questions you might start looking for. Were there certain skills I used in some of these? I was working with one client and they started saying, wow, there's a lot of customer service stories here. And it wasn't necessarily a thing that they were touting in their branding, but wow, we started coming up with really great customer service stories. So that sort of becomes a theme. I think the other things you look at are there certain types of conflicts that I overcame a lot? Was I really creative a lot? Did I learn from it? What was that peak moment? Are there certain patterns that start to come up? Those are the things I think where you start to see the brand come alive. A lot of folks will start, this is what I call bottoms-up branding. A lot of folks will start with, well, I am innovative and creative, and then they try to fill in the blanks. And there's nothing wrong with aspirationally, I think, having some targets. But I think when you've already built it from actual examples that you have done and other people have reminded you of, you build it from the bottom up, it's a much more solid foundation. And I think it gives you a lot of confidence that it's not just lip service. These are things you've actually done, and it's really invigorating.
So when you put those words in there, you can defend them.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And we also have to be careful about the length of stories, though.
Yeah.
You don't want to sit there and talk forever.
Right.
Because there's a point where you're going to lose that person.
Yep.
So is this something you consciously look at, the lengths?
I think that's a good question. The best story is one where the other person interrupts and joins in, first of all. So shorter is always better, enough to engage them. I'll kind of briefly talk about this idea of the chapter model. There's no one way to structure a story. But as I've spent a lot of time looking at literature, movies, neuroscience, communications work, there's certain things that seem to come up again and again. And I've sort of developed a mnemonic device to help people at least bullet point that out. And so without memorizing a story, just signposting it, thinking about the bullet points on a little index card, this is a way that someone can have the story available, kind of practice it without sounding canned. And so here are the elements in the word chapter. C is for the conflict. What did you solve? H is for hero. Who is the hero? Maybe you. Who else were allies or mentors, other people? The A is for the anticipation. Why was it important? Maybe the meeting wouldn't have happened. The sales program would have been canceled if I hadn't done this. The P is the peak moment. How did it get solved? That's sort of the crescendo, right, in the Hollywood version. But just like, what did you do that fixed the problem? T and E are transform and explain. A lot of people stop at the peak, by the way. But transform and explain. So what did you learn from it? How are you different? Now that I solved that problem, I'm much more comfortable jumping into an engineering project. And the final thing is R, relate. Relating the story back to someone else, asking a question, posing it back to them to get them engaged. So just a real simple thing, but if someone bullets those out, I find that's a great way for them just to get it. And they end up not really relying on it once they're in the moment, but it's great practice. And it's really sound because it's backed up by best practices and frankly a lot of psychology.
Well, Andrew, we want to thank you for going through this process with us, and I'm sure anybody out there who follows it they're going to come up with great personal stories. Not one story, but many stories. And in another chat, we'll go over how you can categorize and bank those stories.
Absolutely.
If somebody wanted to reach you, where could they reach you?
Just on the web at www.7storylearning.com. It's spelled out SEVEN, storylearning.com.
Thank you, Andrew. You can hear more advice and stories from Andrew and other experts by listening to past chats on our website at www.newlandingsjobchat.org or just search for Job Chat on YouTube. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as always, until next time, may your days be full of health, happiness, and success.